Bartolomé de las Casas was without a doubt an important figure to the history of the Americas and gave us an understanding of early colonial Spain. It is important to emphasize everything we know of him is through his autobiographical writings, and to keep it into perspective, the information he wrote down may be skewed and inaccurate. Before I go into his life, there were events before his birth I feel need to be said. In 1469, Prince Ferdinand and Queen Isabella would marry, uniting two powerful kingdoms in Castile and Aragon that would form Spain. Las Casas was born in Spain, Seville, in 1474. His father, Pedro, was a merchant. There is no information about how he grew up or his schooling, but it's safe to assume he did receive a fine education. In 1492, King Ferdinand and Queen Isabella finished the Reconquista in Spain and gained Granada to finally kick out the last of the Moors. That same year, Columbus gets commissioned by Spain and sails to find the West Indies. In 1493, Las Casas' father Pedro would go with Columbus on his second expedition, and during his time, Pedro would acquire land in Hispaniola. Pedro would return to Spain in 1502, and in that same year, Las Casas was about 18 years old when he would sail to Hispaniola. And through his writings, he would acquire his own encomienda. An encomienda, as we learned early in the semester, is a system the Spanish implemented that the Indians will work the land that the Spanish had obtained. Later, Las Casas would take his vows to become a priest, and by 1510 he would conduct his first Mass in Hispaniola, but he still was not invested to the indigenous cause. In 1512, Las Casas joined conquistador Captain Narvaez in the conquest of Cuba. Las Casas will witness the slaughter of hundreds of Taino Indians, and this would be one of many events that made Las Casas go against the encomienda system and the desire to end the mistreatment of the Indians. Throughout his travels in Cuba, Las Casas would become more aware of how little the Indians were able to eat, how the women and children were malnourished, and the men working laboriously in the gold mines, so battered and bruised they were unable to stand on their feet, he would write. Las Casas would document in the span of 3 months, 7,000 Tainos would die. By 1514, he renounces his land, the encomienda system, and begins his mission to fight for Indian rights. He tried to convince the Spaniards of Hispaniola and Cuba that the system he had denounced was morally wrong through his sermons. But due to the lack of response he received from the people, Las Casas sought out to do more. In November of 1515, Las Casas returns to Spain to speak with King Ferdinand, but due to delays he would not meet with the king until Christmas of that year. Las Casas would express a profound enmity of the treatment of the Indians and the encomienda system. The king would listen and asked Las Casas for a second meeting, but that would not materialize because King Ferdinand would die the next month. Las Casas will meet one of the regent rulers, Cardinal M.E.S, and presented his first proposal for the salvation of the Indians. In 1518, Las Casas would meet with the young King Charles in the plan to colonize Venezuela to a place where priests and Indians would farm, and a place where the Indians would not be exploited. Las Casas hoped that this would be a peaceful sanctuary for the Indians, but the project failed. During the decades, his works in Nicaragua and Guatemala, Las Casas would create reforms for Indian rights. In 1514, Las Casas was credited with the new laws that King Charles would decree, prohibiting Indian slavery and their abuse. By 1544, Las Casas would be bishop in Chiapas, near South Mexico and Guatemala. He would oversee that no one would break these laws. From the start, all the royal officials were against him, and this caused him a lot of trouble in implementing law and order. As time passed on, there was so much chaos and laws were being broken. Las Casas, with no support, will renounce being bishop in 1547. And that same year, he will return to Spain. Between 1550 and 1551, Las Casas would debate against a known scholar named Juan Sepulveda, who would argue the issue that the Indians should be converted to Christianity by force, and Indians were meant to be slaves due to their nomadic sinful lifestyle, such as sodomy, cannibalism, and human sacrifice. In this debate, Las Casas did not win, but the significance of the debate was how he fought for Indian rights, and exemplifying why he is known as the defender of the Indians. After the debate, Las Casas maintained a post in the Spanish courts. He became the government's chief advisor on Indian problems. Las Casas would publish his first book of many in 1554, the book called A Short Account of the Destruction of the Indies. This book would be read throughout Europe, and this information will give Spain's enemies a convenient way to attack Spain's mistreatment of the Indians. This will be known as the Black Legend, and there are those who blame Las Casas for creating it. Nevertheless, staying true to his work, Las Casas would continue to write, and in the courts he would do all he could to help give Indian rights until his death in 1566. Las Casas' mission was to relieve the oppression and extermination of American natives. He earned many titles, such as the first human rights activist for the Indians, universal protector of all the Indians of America, and the creator of the Black Legend. The essence of Bartolomé de Las Casas in history was his unequivocal voice for the disdain of Indian treatment and slavery.